This is Garis, Masculist MGTOW flyers. That is 2 3-page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 662, part 2, entitled Masculist Ammunition for Men Confronting Their Feminazi Girlfriends. Carrying straight on. Masculists see fluffies as vermin, man-slaving, divorce-raping vermin. Because a fluffy has not bothered fipping up. She is career incompetent. So when the divorce comes, which happens to half of marriages, she will be incapable of earning a good living. So the fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges who took over the divorce courts in the 70s and brought with them, by default, traditional fluffy expectations of men, seeing men as cash machines. So they then butchered men, that is 1 in 4 fathers, by ripping their kids away from them with a 90% probability in many Western countries, giving the house to the ex-wife so that she can raise her kids in it, forcing the ex-husband to make child payments to the kids he's barely allowed to see. He will lose half his wealth and stuff to her, and if she is a real fluffy, he may be forced to pay her alimony for the rest of his life, with no legal nor moral obligation on her to bother to get a job and pull her own financial weight. Thus 1 father in 4 gets butchered by these hated fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges who don't give a shit about what they're doing to men, caring only about the well-being of divorcing mothers and the kids. Masculists have such a hatred of these fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges that in many countries now over 2/3 of young men refuse to marry and reject paternity by refusing to give young women their sperm, since they utterly reject the risk of 1 chance in 4 of being butchered in a fluffy feminist controlled divorce court. So they live the MGTOW, MGTOW, men going their own way lifestyle of rejecting marriage and paternity and spending their money on themselves. They see marriage as toxic for men and wipe their hands of it, and paternity. Masculists see these fluffy feminist divorce court lawyers and judges as hypocrites and genociders, since they want equal rights with men in the parliaments but reject equal obligations with men by refusing to fip up, expecting women to still be fluffies who expect to manslave and divorce rape a man. With 1 father in 4 being divorce raped, as described above, it's not surprising why most young men today in Western countries reject marriage and paternity. Masculists want the legislation of the para, that's paternity rejection right, so that men have the same legislated right to reject an unwanted pregnancy that women have. Women already have the mara, that's maternity rejection right, aka abortion right, but men don't have the para, which to Masculists is the most blatant example of sexual discrimination that exists in either direction, that screams out for reform due to its massive gender injustice towards men. Due to the lack of the para, millions of women are able to force men into fatherhood to have a kid he doesn't want, thus manslaving him for 2 decades to raise the kid he has to pay for. This forced fathering is the 3rd of the horrible, decades-lasting gender crimes that women commit against men that makes Masculists so hate such gender criminal women. Forced fathering takes 2 main forms, pill lying and paternity fraud. Pill lying is when a woman tells her man that she's taking the pill, but isn't. She wants to get pregnant and he doesn't. So when she gets pregnant, she can force him to pay for the kid for 2 decades, thus manslaving him, a massive gender crime against men. Paternity fraud is even worse, since she lies to her man that the kid growing in her is his, when she knows it's not. Thus the man is forced to pay for 2 decades for a kid that, in capital letters, is not even his. It's possible that up to 10% of all pregnancies may involve paternity fraud. Masculist theorists see that by creating a FIP society in which both sexes are FIPs and hence financially responsible adults, that the above big three gender issues for men can be removed. So to achieve the fipping of women and the men fairing of the gender laws, in brackets, for example, in the divorce courts, and the men fairing, pushing women to fip up, legislating the OPTAB, OPTAB, obligatory paternity testing at birth for all births, to block women's paternity fraud, etc. Close brackets. It will be necessary to establish GECs, GECs, gender equality committees, in the parliaments that consist half of female feminist politicians and half of male masculist politicians, so that the gender issues of both sexes are dealt with equally, which is far from being the case in today's gynocentric society when it comes to the level of awareness of men's issues in today's world. The masculist half of these GECs will reform the divorce courts, push the fipping of women in the schools and colleges, legislate the para and the OPTAB, etc. Universities will have men's studies courses. Journalists will write about masculist ideas so that people become as familiar with masculist ideas as they are already with feminist ideas, so that women like yourself, who are largely monoconscious, that is, who only know feminism, become better educated into masculist ideas and lose their monoconscious feminazi bitchery, that is, preaching that gender oppression is a one-way street, when the masculists know all too well that it's very much a two-way street, and that women oppress men worse, as should be clear from the above. I hope you're now beginning to see my point as a masculist, that men are very definitely oppressed, and worse, by women. F. I've never heard anyone spell out the core beliefs of masculism so clearly and persuasively before. I have to admit you have a point. I would not like to be a woman slave to a parasitic man, nor be divorce raped by a man, with me having to work for decades to keep him alive financially, and I would want the para if I were a man. M. Masculists want women to be snurfs, that's slim, nurturative fips, so are strongly motivated to teach women to become biconscious, that is, to have both their feminist and their masculist consciousnesses raised by learning some masculism. Masculists find that monoconscious feminists tend to be rather feminazi bitchy, since they are angry at men for the ways that men oppress women, which is what feminism teaches them. So, of course, they are angry at men. Men don't want relationships with misandrist, male-dumping, feminazi cunts and leave them rotting on the shelf by totally ignoring them. In the US today, according to the polling company Pew, PEW, Research Center, over 60% of young men between 18 and 30 refuse to even date women, due to these women being seen as being undateable by being too feminazi bitchy. Masculists prefer to have relationships with biconscious feminists, since such women are much less bitchy, since they have had their anger at men for the ways that men oppress women cancelled by their female masculist anger at women for the ways that women oppress men. Thus, biconscious women are a lot nicer and more approachable by men, so such women are much more likely to have boyfriends. Masculists want feminists to be biconscious, so to accelerate this process, masculists target the boyfriends and monoconscious feminists by teaching these men the basics of masculism, thus making these previously monoconscious male feminist boyfriends biconscious, who then see the monoconsciousness of their feminist girlfriends as profoundly hypocritical, given that women oppress men worse. So these now biconscious men will then see the monoconsciousness of their feminist girlfriends as sexist, hypocritical and bigoted, and hence become disgusted with them and will dump them. When millions of monoconscious feminist girlfriends have been dumped in this way, women will be forced to become biconscious, or they'll be effectively exterminated by biconscious masculists by being forced to rot on the shelf. F. Now you're really scaring me. Cheers. Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. Brackets. Click on the Masculist tab for 660 plus Masculist essays and their videos. See also our London Real interview on Masculism at AI will kill 1 billion people, do we create our exterminators, ? Professor Hugo de Garis, London Real, brackets. See the last half hour of this 2-hour interview for the Masculist segment. These flyers are available in text and video formats on Minds, BitChute, Odyssey, MGTOW.tv and X. Ciao.